The topic I chose for my project was the history and evolution of rock and roll. I wanted to focus mainly on three questions in my research. The first being, who were the founders of rock and roll? Of course, the first thing that popped up when I searched that was Elvis. I didn't believe he was the only one who invented it, so I dug deeper, read a few articles, and found out Elvis did help invent rock, but he wasn't the only one. He's just who popularized it. Chuck Berry, Jerry Lee Lewis, and Buddy Holly are just a few of the names that helped invent rock. Where I really had to research was with my other two questions. They actually have a lot to do with each other. They were, how has the sound of rock and roll expanded, and how has rock and roll melted into other genres and become more than just one genre? At first, I couldn't find anything, so I looked up the evolution of rock and roll's genres, and a newspaper article came up, and that helped me a lot. The first genre that rock music was involved in other than itself was rockabilly, a very popular genre in the 50s. In the 1960s, rock got big. When the British invasion came around, people went crazy for the Beatles. They were a huge influence on rock. British invasion was a lot like rockabilly, but less swinging, and it had a lot of piano. The Beatles' British invasion spawned the hippie psychedelic genre, which was British invasion but more vibrant and louder. Bands like the Grateful Dead, Pink Floyd, and the Rolling Stones were part of the psychedelic genre. One of the most renowned artists of the 60s, yet with the shortest time, was the amazing Jimi Hendrix. Some people consider him to be one of the best, if not the best, guitarists of all time. Some people argue that Jimmy Page of Led Zeppelin was better, but we'll get to him later. In the late 1960s, progressive rock with instruments other than the standard guitars and drums, was helped along mainly by Pink Floyd. Folk rock also became popular, which was an acoustic classic blues and rock, and it was helped along by Bob Dylan. Heavy metal also made its big debut in angry, straightforward, fast music made popular by the Black Sabbath. Here's where we get to Led Zeppelin, the awesome 70s. Led Zeppelin was immensely popular because of their unique sound, blues and hard rock. AC/DC also emerged in the mid-70s with a very bluesy, heavy metal kind of thing. They called it hard rock. Queen was a really cool band with a variety of different kinds of music, including hard rock, swing, and punk. Speaking of punk, let's talk about the Ramones. The Ramones were the founders of punk. Punk was hard rock for angry teenagers. They created the genre that would live until the 2000s in the form of post-punk. Roots rock also came around, which was a lot like folk except with electric guitar. Bruce Springsteen and the E Street Band and Creedence Clearwater Revival were two very popular roots rock bands. The 80s, a magical place where all fashion trends are bad and the haircuts are worse. The one thing the 80s did have, though, was awesome music. It was full of hard rock and heavy metal bands who played face-melting guitar solos and had insane hair. Their heavy metal wasn't as heavy as Black Sabbath, it was just screechy. AC/DC started getting really popular with their angry comeback album, Back in Black, and Guns N' Roses busted into radios with Axl Rose screaming and Slash shredding on guitar. The 80s were pretty much the age of insanely complicated fast guitar solos. I think 3 of the top 10 guitarists of all time, Eddie Van Halen, Slash, and Angus Young, are from the 80s. U2 also came out with a warped futuristic sound and lyrics that could make you laugh, cry, and be really angry all at the same time and not know why. Some people consider U2 to be sort of a punk band, but it was actually alternative rock and indie. Speaking of punk, let's talk the 90s. The 90s were full of a dark, creepy music called grunge. Grunge was punk and hard rock. Some popular grunge bands were Nirvana, Pearl Jam, and Alice in Chains. Punk also came back with Green Day leading the charge. They called it post-punk because it was the Ramones' 70s music in the 90s. Social Distortion was another post-punk band that was relatively successful.